This could be very bad, but at the same time, we see God in His sovereignty working His plan for His people as He promised. So we see behind all of these historical facts this cosmic war that's going on. Observing throughout this series is this cosmic war between God and Satan. Today we'll talk about the serpent seeks the woman's seed. We've gone all the way back into the book of Genesis chapter 3 verse 15, and we've looked at where God told the serpent in the Garden of Eden after the fall of man, saying that he would put enmity between the woman seed and the serpent. And so we've traced in some capacity in the book of Matthew in the first two chapters, this war that's been going on through the centuries between God and the serpent, or Satan, as it were. This morning, we're going to look at what's been historically called the flight to Egypt. Why does the Bible include so much history? I can remember as a new Christian beginning, I feel like, I'm a Christian now. I need to read the Bible. So I started in Genesis and kind of got bogged down, and so then I went into Exodus and I read some of that, and then I moved into other books, and I thought, well, I've heard of Job, so I want to find out about Job. So I turned to Job and I started reading Job, and I got a couple of chapters into that and thought, I have no idea who's speaking or what's going on. The history in the Bible can be a very difficult thing. And so we would ask, if the New Testament tells us how to be saved, then why did God include the Old Testament? Well, in the passage before us today, we will see an answer to that question. Now, I can't learn all the history for you, but I can give you motivation. I can help you understand why it is important to learn the history of redemption. Now, the Bible, understand, is not a history book per se. It is not a history of the world. It is a history of Israel, the people of God, and a history of God's redemptive work in space and time, or in history. And so we don't have everything that ever happened in the Bible. We have the things that God did throughout history to bring about our redemption. But they are true, and they did happen in space and time, in history. And we have to keep that in mind. The first thing that we want to see in the serpent's seeking the woman's seed was that Herod was working his plan. Herod was working his plan. And we see that in chapter 2, verse 7. Then Herod summoned the wise men secretly and ascertained from them what time the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word, that I too may come and worship him. In our last study, we briefly visited Herod the Great. This is what the man called Herod the Great. We saw him as he truly was, a madman who would kill his own children and wives to remain upon the throne. And indeed, he did so. History shows that Herod the Great killed some of his own children whom he felt threatened by. He killed even some of his wives, as he was a madman about keeping power and the throne. Now we meet one of Herod's sons, Archelaus. You'll see that down there. In fact, the Herods, plural, were a dynasty that came to power before the birth of Jesus. Herod the Great came to power by appointment of his friend, someone you may have heard of, Mark Antony. That is how Herod the Great came to power, and he was determined to hold on to it. But Herod's rulership, his sovereignty, was under the authority of the Roman Empire, or the emperor of Rome. There are 6 Herods mentioned in the New Testament, making it pretty hard to know sometimes who we're talking about. In the Bible, in the New Testament, 6 different Herods are mentioned. So that's pretty tough. I pulled from Kenneth Birding, from his blog from Talbot Seminary, a quick, easy way to remember the Herods. I'll read you what he says about it. He says that Herod, Archelaus, was born in 4 B.C. and died in 6 A.D. He was one of Herod the Great's 3 sons mentioned in the Bible. He received 1/2 of his father's territory, the area surrounding and near Jerusalem, that is Judea and Samaria. Joseph was unwilling to move Mary and the toddler Jesus to Bethlehem after fleeing to Egypt, because Bethlehem was in Herod Archelaus' sovereign territory. Like his father, Herod the Great, Archelaus wasn't known to be a very kind or friendly man. In fact, he was a terrible tyrant as well as Herod the Great. The 6 Herods in the New Testament are Herod the Great, and that is, you can remember him by, he's the Herod in the Christmas story. Herod Archelaus is the Herod during Joseph's return to Nazareth instead of Bethlehem. Herod Antipas, it killed John the Baptist. Okay? Herod Philip ruled an area north and east of Galilee. And Herod Agrippa the first was eaten by worms, the Bible says in the book of Acts. And Herod Agrippa the second was the one who put the Apostle Paul on trial. These men were debased, they were violent, they were cruel rulers, every one of them. And many of them were guilty of incestuous relationships and even taking one another's wives. So we're not talking about a good group of people here. So Herod, we see this one. This is Herod the Great to begin with, who spoke to the wise men. Herod the Great tried to unravel his plan. He tried to do this by tricking the wise men. He told the wise men, as we just read, he said, "Go and find the child, the newborn king, and come back and tell me so that I can go worship him." Well, of course, we said before, Herod's official title by Rome was King of the Jews. And who did the Magi come looking for? King of the Jews. So was Herod going to go to Bethlehem and worship the newborn king of the Jews? No, he was definitely not. He was seeking to trick the wise men. But he becomes furious when he finds out that the wise men tricked him. Of course, they were warned in a dream by God, but the wise men did not report back, but went back to their homes, the Bible says, a different way. And so he becomes infuriated. We see in chapter 2, verse 13, and we have what's called the slaughter of the innocents, or the massacre of the children there. If you read a commentary, it might say the slaughter of the innocents. Not sure that's the best title. I don't like them using the word slaughter. No, but William Hendrickson, the great commentator, he said this, slaughter of the innocents, when the truth is no one's innocent. Now, if we understand the term in the sense that they were children, they were babies, then yes, it's a good term. But if we don't understand behind that the fact that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So maybe a better way of saying it is the massacre of the children or the infants in the Bethlehem region. And so he gathers his soldiers and sends them according to the time period that had been designated by the Magi. Now, I want to correct something I did last week. Somehow or other, I got 3 years in my mind, and I said that he killed all the children from 3 years old down because Jesus was possibly 3 years old. Not sure where that came from and how that got in my head, but the truth is it's 2 years old. He says 2 here. Jesus was probably less than 2 years old here. It's a little bit of a guess as to how old. They judge Jesus' age by the date, the fixed date of Herod the Great's death. So that helps a little bit. So Jesus is a toddler at this point. 1.5, we don't really know, but just to make sure, Herod goes and kills all of the male children from 2 years old and down in the Bethlehem region. And I say region, that's going to become important in a moment. So Herod was working his plan. But notice how Matthew, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, brings this section about Herod the Great and his diabolical plan against the Son of God to an end. He says in verse 13, "Now when they had departed, behold, the angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, 'Rise, take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him.' And he rose and took the child and his mother," that's Joseph, "by night, and departed to Egypt, and remained there until the death of Herod." So how well did Herod's plan work? Not too well. Here Herod is on his deathbed, essentially. I mean, he's not on his deathbed, but his health wasn't good if you study it. And you realize he had to have known he didn't have many years to live. And yet he's still willing to go and massacre all of these children just to hang on to his kingdom and his title. But God in his sovereignty put an end to Herod the Great. The second thing is Satan was working his plan. Satan was working his plan. And that's one of the things that we've been observing throughout this series is this cosmic war between God and Satan. Now let me be clear, there is no question who wins. All right? We're not talking about dualism here where God and Satan are at war and we really hope God wins. You know, dualism says that there's an equal part of good and evil. No, we know that God has already won. Satan is already a defeated enemy. So there's no question there, but that never stopped him, did it? Never stopped Satan. He continues to try to unpack his plan, and part of that was to prevent the birth or the coming of the promised seed of the woman. Well, what was Satan's plan? Well, we see in verse 15 that he sought to destroy Israel through Pharaoh. So wait a minute, Pastor, do you know you're in Matthew, not Exodus? Yes, but I want you to begin to follow me pretty closely here and see how Matthew is taking this section of Christ's childhood and the activity that's happening, and he is placing it over the history of Israel. And so we need to see Herod and Herod Archelaus in the same way that we would see in the book of Exodus, Pharaoh. We see that here is this powerful world leader who is seeking to destroy the people of God, or the Son of God, or the child of God, or the prophet of God. All right? We're going to move through all of those because Matthew is flashing these images in front of us in these passages. So I hope that you'll see that as we go. Look in verse 15. And remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet, out of Egypt I call my son. Later he even says, he almost verbatim quotes what God told Joseph. He said, those that sought your life are now dead. Well, it was Herod that saw. That was one person. But it's plural in the passage. So Matthew is flashing back to Joseph being in Egypt. He's flashing back to the people of Israel going down into Egypt and then eventually becoming enslaved in Egypt. And this is where he says out of Hosea 11:1, out of Egypt I called my son. Well, if you go back to Hosea chapter 11, verse 1, you realize that the prophet is talking about the nation of Israel. That passage is not even referring to the Messiah. God is saying, my son is the nation of Israel. And the nation of Israel, he says, I called up out of Egypt. But now Matthew is taking that same idea and applying it to Christ coming back out of Egypt. So Satan is involved in these world leaders who want to destroy Christ and his followers, his people. He sought to kill the Hebrew children in Moses in Egypt. He sought to kill the Israelites and their children in the deportation, as Matthew calls it in chapter 1. He talks about how not only did the people of Israel suffer under Egyptian bondage, but if you remember, hundreds of years later, after their sin, after their waywardness, their idolatry, then God sent the Babylonians in to destroy the southern kingdom and take those people in. The prophet Jeremiah is the one we call the weeping prophet. Why? Because Jeremiah saw that Jerusalem was going to be destroyed. And in chapter 31 of the book of Jeremiah, Jeremiah says what Matthew says here about Rachel and her children, verse 18. A voice, he says it's from the prophet Jeremiah, a voice was heard in Ramah. That's going to be significant in a moment. Weeping and loud lamentation. Rachel, that is Jacob's favorite wife, Rachel weeps or weeping for her children. She refused to be comforted because they are no more. Now that wasn't even referring to Jacob and Rachel when Jeremiah said it. When Jeremiah said it, he's referring to the bloodshed of the people of Israel, the children of Rachel, when the Babylonians invaded Jerusalem and killed men, women, children, boys and girls, and carried some off into slavery. It was a bloodbath. And they destroyed the city. And Jeremiah saw it. And he says this, Rachel is weeping over her children, or the Israelites that inhabited Jerusalem. Now, Matthew is using that passage, which refers to the Babylonian invasion, as in reference to the children who were being massacred in Bethlehem and the surrounding region. So you think, well, how does this connect? Well, it connects historically. So when Matthew is saying this fulfills this prophecy, it fulfills that prophecy, we need to understand in what way it fulfills the prophecy. It's not a prophecy like I'm telling the future. It's a prophecy in the sense that Israel was a type of Christ and suffered many of the things that Christ himself would suffer. He sought to destroy the Davidic line. We talked about that earlier. In verse 17 through 19, we see this as the Babylonians invaded and destroyed. And why would Matthew say that? Well, for one reason is, why are there a group, or why is there a dynasty of the Herods? Because the Davidic line had been decimated by the Babylonians and by the judgment of God. So would there have been an heir of King David on the throne had Israel not forsaken God by their sins? Yes. So the only reason Herod the Great and all of these horrible men are ruling over Israel is because Israel sinned against God. And of course we know that what Satan behind that was seeking to destroy the Davidic line. Why? Because the star of David, because of the root of Jesse, the Messiah is going to come through the offspring of David. So we see behind all of these historical facts this cosmic war that's going on against salvation. Herod and Herod Archelaus were the serpent's latest tyrants being used to attempt to derail God's plan of redemption. Throughout history, we need to understand, as John, we saw in our first John study, and we're going to continue that there are many antichrists. Pharaoh was an antichrist. We see here Herod and the Herods are all antichrists. Many of these world leaders are antichrists. Why? Because they are crushing or seeking to crush the plan of God, the glory of God, the Son of God, the people of God. And so we need to understand that Herod and his group were just the first ones. And those other Herods that we read about also persecuted the church. So Herod was unpacking his plan. Satan was working his plan. But lastly, God was working His plan. Now, one of the things I don't want you to miss here is that God is active in history. God is not some distant deity. God is not asleep in heaven. God is God now. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. God is active now. Did you know God knows who's in the White House? God knows who's in the Congress. God knows who's on every throne or at the helm of every government around the world. He's not unaware. We don't pray so that God will be informed. We pray so that we might be informed and that we might be able to interpret the world around us and the Word of God properly. So God's at work here. And how can you see God at work here? I mean, we could say this could be very bad times. The Roman government is expanding. They've called for a census. They're raising taxes. Sound familiar, huh? Then you've got this situation with Mary. You know, she's expecting. What did everybody else think? Did everybody around think it was a miracle? I doubt it. Now we got Herod in this place. He's killed children. This could be very bad. But at the same time, we see God in His sovereignty working His plan for His people as He promised. So I'm going to quickly run through that just to give you the glimpses, and then we'll wrap up. The first way we see God working His plan is through angels. Notice through this whole thing, we see angels popping up here and there. You know, we see the angels that in verse 20, or an angel in verse 20, and in verse 19, we see an angel appeared to Mary at one point. And then an angel, or angels, I believe it says a multitude of heavenly hosts, praising God and saying, so they appeared to the shepherds. So angels, there's all this flurry of angelic appearances and activity. And let me just say that this is not necessarily something we should expect to happen. What we need to understand is that when God disperses His heavenly host. He is up to something new. All right? Every time we see this in the Old Testament, Paul even refers to it that how that when we receive that Moses received the commandment by the hands of angels. So every time God changes a part of His plan or introduces a new part, we see this flurry of angelic activity, miracles, things like that. So through angels, we see God using His angels to tell people, do this and don't do that, and be warned. Herod's going to try to kill the child, and so forth. Then we see through a star. God literally works through the creation. Somehow, whether it be something that He Himself created, that right there on the spot to give us some miraculous star, or whether God manipulated His creation in a way that it was planetary and reflecting of light, or whether God started that clock ticking back at the beginning of creation, which would be just like Him, so that it would line up exactly then. Either way, God is able and does use His own creation. God used dreams in this situation. That's one of the things that struck me here, is that there are 5 dreams just in Matthew's account. We've got the dream, Joseph's dream. We've got the wise men dream. We've got Joseph's second dream, and Joseph's third dream, and Joseph's fourth dream. Every time Joseph is worried about something, we see Joseph have a dream and be given directions or warnings. Now, what you and I need to see is that every time Joseph did exactly what God said when God said it. Most scholars believe that the wise men left to go another way. The sun went down, and God gave Joseph the dream and said, "Get up and get to Egypt." And Joseph got up, packed the family, he and Mary and Jesus and whatever they needed, and left that very night into Egypt. That kind of rush. But Joseph is this godly man that does everything that God says immediately, is this kind of godliness that we see. And then, of course, all of this connects and undergirds the Scriptures. God used the Scriptures. The Messiah will be born to a virgin. We saw that in chapter 1, verse 22 and 23 as a quotation from the Old Testament. Here again, the importance of the Old Testament. The Messiah will be born in Bethlehem. We saw that in chapter 2, verse 5 and 6 as a quotation from Micah. The Messiah will come from Egypt. We see that in this passage here. The children of Israel will be murdered. We saw that in the idea of Rachel mourning over her children. And the Messiah will be a Nazarene or from Nazareth. And so these are all prophecies from Scripture that marked what the Messiah where He would come from, to whom He would be born, what He would be called. Think about that. Hundreds, if not thousands of years before He was born, these prophecies were pronounced, and Christ's birth fulfilled each of them to the letter. God used types and shadows. Joseph the patriarch was a type of the Messiah. Israel was a type of the Messiah. Moses, remember, there was another time Satan sought to kill the children. And there was a person in that midst who was a foreshadow of the coming Messiah. And who was that? Moses. So we need to understand that God was working His plan, and God's plan trumps Satan's plan. God wins, and He brings us the salvation. So throughout the centuries, God was rescuing Israel as a foreshadow of how He would one day bring rescue to all those who long to be free from the bondage of sin through His greater Son, Jesus Christ. Don't get wrapped up in all of the commercialism, do you know God's Savior? God's gone to a lot of trouble here. God has done so many things throughout thousands of years, fulfilled many prophecies and many miracles, not just so we could give gifts and decorate. I'm not saying that's bad, but I'm just saying it's not for that. It's that we might be saved from our sins. So do you know Christ the Savior? God went through a lot to bring Him to you. If you don't know Him, trust Him today. Let's pray.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to our latest video. Go ahead and click that little thumb so you can like that video, as well as on the bottom right hand corner, click that little bell to subscribe and receive notifications. Thank you again so much for tuning in, supporting our video ministry here at Coggins Church.